big show ahead. We've got a ton of stories for you guys, including a story that was sent to me through you guys on Twitter. I had not seen that story about how the cops and firemen in California let a guy drown. It's crazy. We're going to get to that a little later in the program. And then we've got civil liberties abuses. We're going to start with that. We've got Sarah Palin and Barack Obama on taxes. I have the facts. That's a great story. So a lot to get to. And, of course, Congressman Weiner. We're going to get back into that issue as well. So let's get started. So over the last couple of days, we've been talking about outrageous civil liberty abuses by the government. And one guy who seemed to be standing up to the government was Rand Paul. And I actually gave him credit for that. On the Patriot Act, he said, hey, some of these provisions appear to be unconstitutional. I agree with him. And we had some disagreements over which provision was most important. Of course, in the end, Rand Paul insisted most on the provision that does not allow us to check on whether terrorists are buying guns. So I disagree with that entirely. But where we're talking about our privacy rights, then Senator Paul and I agree. All right. So he seemed to be on the side of civil liberties. All of a sudden, he goes on Sean Hannity's radio program and says something outrageous. Let's listen.
Now you set yourself up to be called a bigot because now you want to profile people at the airport. Well, no, you can't win, Rand. I mean, they've got an answer for everything.
But here's the thing, Sean, is I'm not for profiling people on the color of their skin or on their religion, but I would take into account where they've been traveling, and perhaps you might have to indirectly take into account whether or not they've been going to radical political speeches by religious leaders, but it wouldn't be that they are Islamic. But if someone is attending speeches from someone who is promoting the violent overthrow of our government, that's really an offense that we should be going after. They should be deported or put in prison.
Now you set yourself up to be called a bigot.
I begin to tell you how outrageous and ridiculous that is. So you should be arrested or deported for going to the wrong kind of speeches? Well, how about speeches you don't agree with? How about you went to go check it out? I went to a Tea Party speech, and I don't agree with those guys at all. If they say something crazy, should I go to jail over it? What if you're a bystander walking by the speech? Do you get arrested? And how about the First Amendment, Rand Paul? Have you ever heard about that? Do you know that legally, even if you give a speech that is violent, it's still not illegal, let alone attending a speech where someone else talks about violence? It becomes illegal when you direct it at a certain individual and you say, here's the person that we should commit violence against. Now, the reason why that law is so strident is because we care so much about freedom of speech in this country. That's why we want to give wide leeway to speakers, let alone to listeners. That proposal by Rand Paul is more egregious than any other violation I've seen during the Obama or Bush administrations. It makes me wonder if this guy has any idea what he's talking about. And by the way, who's the first guy who would get arrested under this provision? Of course, Rand Paul. He was at a militia event and a blog called Barefoot and Progressive. Joe Cenk wrote about it there. Very good point. The guys doing the speeches there were holding assault rifles. And Rand Paul attended, he spoke, he certainly listened, and they kept constantly referring to possible violence to overthrow the government. In fact, it doesn't get any more anti-government and insinuating violence than that. So should Rand Paul be imprisoned or deported? I guess that's the question at hand. These guys have no respect for the Constitution. I'm not sure they've even read it or know what it's talking about. And this guy's supposed to be a great civil libertarian on the Republican side. The great words of Sarah Palin. Thanks, but no thanks. That's not the civil libertarian I'm interested in. God, what a disaster these guys are. So that's Rand Paul. Now, as he goes and does that, we still have issues with Obama. And, yesterday we talked about a great number of things, including this crazy FAST program where they were trying to figure out what your intent is. And then you've got the people saying, hey, look, not people, military officials telling reporters, hey, if we get a cyber attack, we might counter with missiles. It's an act of war. By the way, you know what just happened? Apparently a cyber attack from China, where not only did they break into Google and get some of the private information of average citizens in the United States, and apparently a great deal of citizens of the United States, but some of our national security officials also had their emails hacked into. So, I mean, that's interesting on two different fronts. First of all, what happened? I thought that conservatives said that accounts couldn't be hacked, right? I mean, when it comes to Anthony Weiner, they think it's crazy to hack an account. That couldn't have possibly happened. But now all of a sudden they're saying, oh, all these national security officials had their emails hacked into. And second of all, as I was telling you, I guess that's an act of war now. So when do we start bombing China? I mean, look at how absurd this is. And you think we're going to bomb China for their cyber attack? Hell no, right? Because that would start a devastating, disastrous World War III kind of event, right? But we say some Arab is, cyber attacking us. And you think we're not going to send drones over wherever it is, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Arab or not, Muslim or not, whatever. We'll figure that out later, man. As that military official said, we'll send a bomb up their smokestack, and then, this part he didn't say, but he basically saying we'll figure that stuff out later, okay? So it's disaster on top of disaster, and it's one thing to go kill people we claim are our enemies, claim are terrorists, right? And sometimes it's right, and sometimes apparently it's not. Remember all the kidnappings we did of people we thought were incredibly dangerous and were terrorists, and then we find out, oops, we had the guy's wrong spelling of his name. Khalid Masri was a classic example where we kidnap him. He's a German citizen. We kidnap him and then drop him off in Eastern Europe after many months of torture going, oops, sorry, we had the wrong guy. Same thing happened to a Canadian citizen, etc. What happens when you just do the bombing because you thought that guy launched a cyber attack? Come to find out you misspelled his name. So this is disaster on top of disaster. Okay, now, on top of all that, I got to tell you about this New York piece. Have you guys seen The Secret Share? And that's a very long piece, but it's great in its information. Did you know that Barack Obama's administration has launched more investigations and it charged people with the Espionage Act for leaking documents than the rest of the administrations in United States history combined? So understand what this is. What it is somebody goes and leaks to a reporter. Now, there are arguments over whether some of the material is classified or not classified, right? And that's for the court to decide. Okay, that's one thing, and that's a fair argument, right? But what the Obama administration is saying is, this is not just you leak to the, you leak the classified information. They're saying you're a spy. This is an Espionage Act, punishable by death, okay? Now, are they really going to execute these people? Probably not. Life sentences? Maybe. So, they're saying that it is possible that these people, one of them is Thomas Drake, okay? And so they are looking into him, and he's one of the investigations they have launched. So why is the Obama administration that claimed that to care a lot about civil liberties when they were running as progressives, right, then come in and do more civil liberties abuses than anything else? Now let's talk about Thomas Drake for a second so you get a sense of the scope of the problem. Here's a guy who worked at the NSA and was so concerned about fraud, waste, and abuse at the NSA. Now, one of the things was a program called Thin Thread versus a program called Trailblazer. Now, Thin Thread was incredibly cheap and incredibly effective, okay? But they wanted to give a contract, the higher-ups at the NSA did, including Michael Hayden, who I told you on a number of occasions was one of the worst government officials we've ever had in our government. And of course, bipartisan praise for Michael Hayden. He's the guy that looks like the dad from the 70s show, right? And everybody's like, oh, he kept us safe, he kept us safe. If Thin Thread was running, and it was ready, by the way, before 9/11, the creators of the program say it definitively would have caught some of the information that we definitely did miss about the attackers, right? Now, we'll never know, of course, because that already happened, etc., right? Why did they go for Trailblazer instead? Well, because it cost $1.3 billion. And so a lot of people were going to make money off of that, including defense contractors with a lot of pull. Now, when Thomas Drake, among others, becomes a whistleblower and talks about this, and by the way, he was 100% right, they later killed Trailblazer because it went massively over budget and never worked, okay? So if you're right and you are a whistleblower and you point out waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, well, you got to be punished. So they said, all right, you got all these classified documents, and we saw some on your computer, and we saw some in your garage, after, of course, they raided his house, and we're charging you with the Espionage Act. To give you a sense of how absurd it is, first of all the stuff on his computer, they're like, yeah, our bad. We thought it was classified. It turns out it's not classified. We still got the stuff in the garage. I mean, you got about 5 documents there. He says it's not classified at all. Again, to give you a sense of how absurd, one of the documents was clearly labeled not classified. After they arrest Thomas Drake, several months later, they say that document should have been classified. They then change its classification, and they say to Drake, hey, you know what? You should have known that we would later change the classification to classified. Come on now. Come on. I mean, who in their right mind thinks that that's a reasonable case? And we got the Obama administration trying to put this guy in jail for God knows how long, charging him with the Espionage Act like he's a spy. Now, remember what Obama said running, of course. He was going to protect whistleblowers. That whistleblowers were really important because they pointed out waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. And when they actually did, they come down on them like a ton of bricks. Did these cases start under Bush? Yes. But I don't know if President Obama knows this, but he's now the president. He can change those things. But no, he's got to prove to the Republicans how tough he is. Oh, Bush did Espionage Act, after whistleblowers? I'll do it even more. Terrible and disastrous idea. All right, so anybody who tells you that Obama's good on civil liberties doesn't know a word about it. Look, you can argue other things. You can argue that the health care law was great. You can argue that the Supreme Court justices are fantastic. Those are fair arguments. You could argue Lilly Ledbetter. You cannot argue that Barack Obama is a good president on civil liberties. It is not a case you can make. He has been terrible, oftentimes worse than the Bush administration. All right. Now, we're going to go on to Sarah Palin. So one disaster following another. Okay. So Sarah Palin is on her bus. Of course, she won't talk to anybody except Fox News Channel because they're the ones who pay her bills. In fact, she went over to Fox headquarters in New York during her famous bus tour, and she got notes from her bosses on what to do. Remember, they signed her paychecks. So she got her walking orders, and then she moseyed on along on her bus, right? By the way, Fox News is saying they're not changing the status of her at all. Now, if they thought she was running for president, they would have to change her status and stop employing her, right? So that is Fox News basically saying, we think Sarah Palin is not a real candidate. That is as much of an admission as it gets. So she's talking to Fox News about taxes and Obama, and look at how badly she butchers this. Let's watch.
To step back and looking at the facts. Look at the debt that has been accumulated in the last 2 years. It's more debt under this president than all those other presidents combined.
It is entirely untrue. Okay? So, first of all, under President Obama, so far we have collected $3.7 trillion worth of debt. Now, that is terrible. Okay? Let's put some perspective on it. First of all, where did it come from? It came from the terrible downturn in the economy because we collect a lot less tax revenue. Who started that downturn? The disastrous Bush administration that started this incredible global and certainly American-wide recession. Okay. Second of all, they started the Bush tax cuts. Now, President Obama should have never agreed to extend them, but he did, and that is actually the biggest source of our accumulating debt. And the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Anybody want to guess as to who started those? Yes, the Bush administration. Now, President Obama could get out of those quicker. I think that, and I would argue he should. But that's how you get to $3.7 trillion in debt. Now, is that more than the rest of the presidents combined? Here's the only problem with that. Yes, it is not even remotely true what Sarah Palin said. In fact, before he came into office, our debt stood at $10.6 trillion. So, meaning that let me do the math for you. $3.7 trillion is significantly less than $10.6 trillion. Okay, but it gets better. How about Bush? How much debt did he create? $4.9 trillion on his watch. So not only did President Obama not have as much debt as the rest of the presidents combined, he didn't have as much debt as the last president, which is a Republican president. So, as usual, Sarah Palin speaks without having a clue as to what she's talking about. Now, speaking of taxes, the Republicans go to the White House. They're going to talk about the debt ceiling. And during those discussions, the president brings up the fact that there is now a lower tax rate than there was under most of the Reagan administration. And the Republicans snicker like little girls, okay? Like they're in third grade and Susie said something funny, right? And the Hill reports that they rolled their eyes and they laughed and Issa joked about it like, What, the taxes would be lower than Reagan? What a ridiculous proposition. Except for the fact that, of course, they are. For most of Reagan's presidency, taxes were above 35% for the top marginal tax rate. They were at 50%, for example, in 1984 when President Reagan got reelected. At one point, they dropped to 28% for the highest bracket in 1986, but for 6 years, it was actually much higher than the 35% we have now. So that's 6 out of the 8 Reagan years. But you think that's bad? Wait till you get the real taxes that people pay. The effective tax rate under Reagan was an annual average of 18.2% of GDP. You know what it is today? 14.8%. Much lower. Under the whole 8 years of Reagan, it was much higher. Okay? So President Obama is entirely right, and the Republicans, being the fools that they are like, oh, he's got facts. Facts. No, of course not. Reagan is a god. He had the lowest taxes ever. We don't care about no stinking facts. Well, how do you argue with people who do not care about numbers or facts or math? These are the real numbers. By the way, where does the effective tax rate numbers come from? From Bruce Bartlett, one of the top economic advisors to former President Ronald Reagan. Okay? By the way, the 14.8% effective tax rate that we pay right now is the lowest it's been in 60 years in this country. So the taxes are historically low. Overall, since they've been keeping track, the rate is 18.5%. So one of the reasons the bond markets aren't flipping out about our deficit and they think we can pay back all of our debts is because they look at it, and Bloomberg had a great article about this, and they say, well, your taxes are so ridiculously low, all you have to do is raise them a little bit and then you'd be able to pay back all the debt. That's why we're not worried. But of course, the Republicans say, under no circumstances will we ever raise taxes. But then why are we having the discussion? I don't know why the president humors them on this. He says we have to look at the revenue side, and they say that's off the table. All right, well, if that's off the table and that's my demands, and all you have on the table is your demands, well, then why don't you get the hell out? We're having a meeting at the White House, and you're telling me I'm not allowed to discuss our side of the equation. Well, then get out of the house. Get out. I don't want to have this discussion with you. Look, the president humors these guys so much. Why are we having the entire discussion on their end of the table? And what happens? First of all, one of them, Jeff Landry, didn't even show up. He said, I respectfully turned down this invitation because this is a failed presidency and I don't want to be lectured by this president who's with his failed policies. Okay, first of all, Jeff Landry should be removed from any discussion or budget conversations. All right, if you want to be like that, okay, you don't want to come, but then we won't invite you. Very simple. Problem solved. Second of all, the Cantors and the Paul Ryans and the John Boehners, they all came out afterwards and they talked about how they lectured the president. Ryan says, we had to explain to him our plan because apparently he doesn't understand it. He keeps mischaracterizing it. And Cantor talked about, he keeps demagoguing. And you know what the president says? He says, well, there's been demagoguing on both sides. No, don't say that. Your side is not demagoguing. Your side is correct. They would cut Medicare. They would end Medicare as we know it. They would turn it into a voucher program. Paul Ryan lectures him at the White House about how you're not allowed to call it a voucher anymore. But it is a voucher. These guys think that they're 100% in charge. Look, the president has to set them straight. You've got the facts. You're right. And now there's a new poll out. One of the top Democratic pollsters does a poll and asks them, hey, how do you react to the Medicare plan, right? And the numbers are devastating for the Republicans. They have lost the trust of the middle class. When you ask the question, who do you trust more on Medicare? Overwhelmingly Democrats, much better numbers than they had even earlier when the Ryan plan had already been introduced, but people didn't know about it as well. When you ask them, who do you trust to take care of the average middle class voter? They say the Democrats by much larger margins than before. And when they ask the pollster, how's the way that the Democrats can lose this advantage? He says, if they agree to Medicare cuts that the Republicans want. Exactly. So why would you do that? So unfortunately, Kevin McCarthy comes out, one of the Republican leaders in the House, and says President Obama has agreed that entitlement reform, meaning Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, are on the table, and they will be part of the budget cuts. Disaster! What are you doing? What are you doing? But it's nearly impossible to turn them around, man. Because, the Washington pundits come in and, they say, oh, great job. You're such a genius for doing exactly what Clinton did. He compromised with the Republicans and he won re-election. That's what you have to do. Just give the Republicans what they want. Everything will be great. If he believes that, then, not only has he been bad in some policy, as I pointed out in this segment, but I'm going to say something that I know shocks Washington. I think he's a bad politician. I just do. Everybody says, oh, but he already won once. Yeah, so did Carter. How'd that work out? So did George H.W. Bush. How'd that work out? Just because you won once doesn't mean you're the world's greatest politician. If he gives away this enormous advantage, it is going to be one of the biggest political blunders I have seen in my lifetime. They have them exactly where they want them. All of the polls indicated. The only way you let them off the hook is if you agree with the Republicans on Medicare cuts. And every indication is that is exactly where the Obama White House is headed. All right, I got to take a break. I'll come right back. All right, back on the Young Turks. Get a load of who's back.
I'm so excited to be back. So in the postgame, we're going to talk about my trip. I went to the Dominican Republic. It was one of the best trips I've ever taken, except getting to the Dominican Republic from LA is the worst process ever. No, like I've traveled to all sorts of places. I've been on a plane for more than 10 hours just to get to Europe, and even that wasn't as terrible as it was traveling to the Dominican Republic. It has nothing to do with the Dominican Republic. There are just no direct flights there. It's really hard to get to the place that we went to. But I have great stories, okay? Drama-filled sexual stories for the postgame, for the members.
Bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, all right. So that's for, like you said, for the members. All right, now, we have a very important story to start with.
Yes, I want to start off with a little fun. Anthony Weiner. So Anthony Weiner has been in the media, not for anything important, but because he has been accused of sending a Twitter picture to a woman in Seattle of his nether regions.
Nether regions, nicely done.
Okay, so it's supposedly a photo of him in his underwear, and he tweeted it publicly to this woman in Seattle.
So they claim.
Right, so they claim. So the media has been hounding him about this. Okay, he wants to talk about policy, he wants to talk about important things, but the media wants to talk about his penis. Okay, so we have a video of Anthony Weiner getting very upset with the media for continuously asking him questions about this so-called Twitter picture. Let's watch.
I didn't send that picture out.
But that's not a picture of you.
No, I can't say with certitude. My system was hacked. Pictures. Look, this was a prank that I've now been talking about for a couple of days. I'm not going to allow it to decide what I talk about for the next week or the next 2 weeks. And so I'm not going to be giving anything more about that today. I think I've been pretty responsive to you in the past. I would get back.
This is not that
I would get back.
This is not that situation.
I would get back. Well, why don't you do it? What, you want to do the briefing? Do you want to do the briefing, sir?
From your Twitter account,
sir,
a lewd photograph was sent to a college student.
Sir.
Answer the question. Was it from you or
sir,
not?
Permit me. Do you guys want me to finish my answer?
Yes, this
okay.
answer.
I am not going to permit myself to be distracted by this issue any longer.
All you have to do is say no to that question.
You are free. You're very good at.
You're not following her on Twitter. Say no to the question.
Why don't you let me do the answers and you do the questions?
As soon as you answer the question asked you, sir, we will.
I'm with you, buddy. This is now day 3. You have statements that my office has put out.
But they don't answer the question.
There are statements that my office has put out. And there are going to be people who are going to want, look, this is the tactic. The guy in the back of the room who's throwing the pie or yelling out the insult wants that to be the conversation.
But you are the one who said
Dana,
it
let
me,
me,
that you were hacked. And that's a criminal potential.
Dana, let me, I'm going to have to ask that we follow some rules here. And one of them is going to be U.S. questions. If I do the answers, that seem reasonable?
I'd love to get an answer.
That would be reasonable, right? You do the questions. That'd be reasonable. You do the questions. I do the answers, and this jackass interrupts me. How about that as the new rule of the game?
Look, Anthony Weiner is a man of my own heart because I totally feel sympathy for him in that video. That's exactly, I know that PR 101 tells you that you don't respond that way to the media, right? Except I wouldn't be able to help myself. That would be my response. I would tell them to shut the hell up, okay? Focus on what matters. It is now day 3 and I don't want to talk about my penis.
All right, in fact, I'm surprised he didn't tell them that.
A shame! It is a shame! A shame!
Okay.
He is fiery. That's what I love about him.
Now, look, here's the thing, right? He does that press conference. He gets in a much bigger trouble, okay? Because everybody says, oh, that's it. He's avoiding the topic. He's totally that. He must be guilty. He must be guilty because he's avoiding the topic and won't answer the question straight. Now, I've seen Congressman Weiner a million times on television, and that is his normal style. He's combative, right? Mm-hmm. And so when he was combative in this case, everybody's like, that's it. Officially guilty. And I'm like, no, he's not guilty. He's not even close to guilty. And, you know, I did this yesterday where we laid out the case. Today there's even further follow-ups. For example, from they upload the picture through this thing called YFrog onto Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. And Reuters does an analysis and shows that this picture got uploaded on the YFrog from a place that none of his other pictures are uploaded from. Come on, man. Come on.
It's such a stupid thing to want to investigate. And Breitbart wants to do like this big investigation into this story, which is so stupid. Why would we want to waste our time on something as dumb as this, you know? And he's arguing that if it was a conservative, you know, that we would be all over it. But since it's a Democrat, we're not all over it, which also doesn't make any sense.
How about Bill Clinton, John Edwards, Elliot Spitzer, etc.? Like at this point, Bill O'Reilly's saying it should literally be a federal case. Well, you know, why didn't he call the cops? He must be guilty, et cetera, et cetera. So, and by the way, somebody else did an experiment, and apparently there's a problem of like people can log on to your account and upload pictures onto it, and they tried to see if they could do it on one of the blogs, and it turns out, yeah, he had one of his readers, I believe, on the blog do it to his account without knowing any of his information.
If you are at all savvy with the internet, if you try really hard and you do, you know, your homework, you can find ways to hack into people's email accounts, social networking accounts. It's so easy. It happens all the time, every day. And isn't it kind of funny? His last name is Weiner. There's a Weiner controversy. It's a prank. It's a prank.
It's so obvious. And the girl in Seattle who it was sent to says, I've never met Anthony Weiner. I know that he's a congressman. I'm a fan of his, right? But I've never been to D.C., I've never been to New York, never met the guy. This is crazy. And It turns out there was a guy she knows who's been harassing her about being a fan of Weiner. And she's like, you might want to look at that guy, right? So now the problem is Anthony Weiner keeps getting himself in trouble with these interviews because he did one with Luke Russert, and now that's opened up a whole new set of questions.
The interviews are disastrous, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, he's talked to everyone. He's talked to Wolf Blitzer on CNN. He's talked to reporters for MSNBC all over the place. And he keeps telling them something that makes people question, you know, his claims even more, right? Actually, let's get to the video right now. So it's video number 2. And he talks about whether or not it could be a picture of his penis.
I didn't send that picture out.
But that's not a picture of you.
You know, I can't say with certitude. My system was hacked. Pictures can be manipulated. Pictures can be dropped in and inserted. One of the reasons that I've asked a firm that includes an internet security arm is to take a look at what the heck happened here, was to make sure it doesn't happen again.
But Congressman, you would remember if you were to take a photograph of yourself like that, you know?
Well, you know, one of the reasons we've asked an internet security firm to come in is to see maybe something was manipulated, maybe something was dropped in. We don't know for sure what happened here.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. I think you'd remember if you took a picture in underwear.
No. Here's the thing, right? First of all, it could be that the guy hacked into his account and took one of his pictures and then posted it to the girl, right? Mm-hmm. So then if you're a congressman, do you want to admit that you had a picture like that and that's you? Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying? Look, everybody's seen it online now. honestly, I'm so uncomfortable with it that I don't even want to put it on, right? Because it's just the flat-out outline of a penis on his underwear. Now, Jon Stewart did it. He's friends with Anthony Weiner, and he had a great line about it saying the guy he knows is a lot more Anthony and a lot less Weiner, right? Which is a funny line and et cetera, right? But maybe it is him, and the guy came in and took the picture and put it in. Then what are you going to say? Like, yeah, that's my penis? I'm a congressman from New York, and that's my penis, right? But they hacked into my, and by the way, they hacked into my account, took one of my pictures, and then they're going to say, why do you have a picture like that, et cetera, right? Now, it probably isn't him anyway, right? But he's got a law firm looking into it. He's got these detectives looking into it to see what happened, right? To get to the bottom of it. What do conservatives say? He lawyered up.
No,
obviously, he's guilty.
I know, but see, that's the thing. It's such a catch-22. You're damned if you do talk to the media. You're damned if you don't.
Literally, today on the MSNBC show, when we were debating this issue, at one point somebody said, hey, you know what? He talked to the media too much and made a mess of it. At another point, they said, well, for a day, he didn't talk to the media. So he's literally damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. That's why this prank is so incredibly successful. And you think people are going to remember later when they realize, oh, no, it wasn't him, or he didn't send it, or whatever it is? No, they're going to go, oh, yeah, Weiner again. Oh. That's why Andrew Breitbart is such a loathsome creature, right? He puts this doctor stuff out there all the time. Okay, he did it with Shirley Sherrod. Again, I had a conservative on the MSNBC show claim today he didn't doctor that video. How can you say that? Everybody knows he doctored the Shirley Sherrod video, right? He didn't show the part where she said, I learned from the mistake and I'm, treat white farmers equal to black farmers. So but Breitbart puts it out there and the rest of the media jump in. I didn't jump in for days because I thought, oh, come on, really? But then CNN on and on and on about so-called Weinergate when it's the most obvious joke of all time. So now, look, the thing is, I feel bad for Congressman Weiner here because he is getting himself into trouble. I wish he could give clearer answers. I don't know why he's not giving a clearer answer on that. So that, I can't say with certainty. One of the possibilities is the theory I had, right? I'm not saying that's the right possibility. There might be another reason for it. But it ain't him, right? He's not the one that sent the picture. And that's what I'm saying. So the rest of it is just they're having giggles with it. The media loves it. And that's the thing other thing that drives me crazy about the media, right? Substantive issues, they're like, oh, it's tough, it's tough. There's a penis out there? Oh, rush into the story. Everybody understands penises. So that's why it becomes so easy to smear everybody with sex and wieners and et cetera and et cetera. And I'm surprised the conservatives don't do it more often. But you know what? They'll be encouraged by this, and they probably will. And, are liberals going to do it? Of course not, because we don't do things like that, right? I mean, could there be a liberal at some point that does something loathsome like that? Of course it's possible, but that is not what liberals do. That's not the MO of progressives, right? It's not to play dirty tricks like this. So they're always going to have this advantage.
They are. They're always willing to hit below the belt.
Literally.
The gentleman is wrong. The gentleman will sit. The gentleman is correct in sitting.
The gentleman would be correct in sitting if the media ever sat on this story. I can't believe they trusted Breitbart. That's the thing that drives me crazy. A proven absolute filthy liar.
Yeah, you would think that he lost all credibility after the whole Sherrod scandal, but it's amazing. His blog is as powerful as ever. He still has tremendous influence. It speaks poorly of our media.
Look. When I first saw the story, I knew that Breitbart was the first guy to publish this, so I was like, oh, come on, right? But of course, the media is so credulous. They're like, oh, it must be true, right? Knuckleheads, empty heads that they are, right? So they go rushing in. But then I saw later that Breitbart went on CNN and made these charges on CNN. What are you doing? And then again, Stewart did a great job with this, where if you saw the segment, I think it was last night, CNN's like, oh, we'll have to, we're not, after he, and then Breitbart threw out something else and said, oh, Congressman Weiner does this all the time with young girls. Lie on top of lie on top of lie. And that's finally when the CNN anchor was like, well, we'll have to ask the congressman about that and get his side. No, you don't ask the congressman, hey, do you do this all the time with young girls, when the son of a bitch just made it up on your air?
Right, you ask
when there's
him
no
for,
evidence of that.
Exactly, you ask him for the evidence. You ask him for facts that back up his claims.
And so Stewart shows that as part of his thing. I saw it, and then he showed it as part of his segment. And then says, you know what you could do is you could do research, right? Like, and you could do the research before you have Breitbart on, right? But that would be, oh, no. That's not what CNN does. CNN does, this jerk-off douchebag says this, and the honest guy says that. I don't know. You be the judge.
They report, you decide.
Yeah, in a matter of speaking. God, they're so bad, man. That neutrality stuff is so lazy and pathetic. Oh, we're just neutral. We're neutral to the truth. We're neutral to the facts. We're neutral to research. We're neutral to Breitbart. Whatever, we're neutral. Losers. All right, anyway, you're getting me worked up, Casper.
I know, you are worked up. All right, this next story is very controversial, and I had a really long discussion about it with Ben and Steve. I want to get your input on it. So a jury in Oklahoma City just charged a man by the name of Jerome S. Ursland with murder, and they are suggesting that he gets sentenced to a life sentence in prison because of the fact that he shot and killed a 16-year-old robber. Okay, so
when I first start reading the story, a guy comes into the store, gets shot, right? I think, oh, you're not going to give the guy who shot him a life sentence. That's crazy talk, right? Then we have a report on it, and you're going to see the beginning of the report. I'm still with the guy, and I'm like, yeah. And then you're going to see the second part of the report, and I changed my mind. I hope you do too. Let's watch.
This dramatic surveillance video captures an attempted robbery turned deadly. Watch as two men run into a local pharmacy, one pointing a gun directly at Jerome Ursland. The pharmacist and other bystanders retreat into the back room. Ursland returns and fires, hitting 16-year-old Antoine Parker in the head. After chasing Parker's accomplice out of the store, Ursland comes back and shoots Parker 5 more times. Lawyers for Ursland said that he saw Parker moving, thought he was still alive, and argued he had a right to defend himself. The jury had to decide if Ursland acted in self-defense or if he was guilty of murder in the first degree.
Defendant is guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree. Punishment is set at imprisonment for life.
Outside the courtroom, elation and relief from Antoine Parker's family. Ursland's family could not hide their grief. However, in his hometown of Oklahoma City, Ursland has seen an outpouring of support from people who want his sentence commuted.
I'm going to spend the rest of my career, however long it may be, to try to right this wrong.
The debate over the case has taken to Facebook. One group supporting Ursland has around 2,000 followers, while other groups say his punishment is deserved. Two sides torn over whether Jerome Ursland is a hero or an executioner. For Good Morning America, Clayton Sandell, ABC News.
All right, so, I see that he shot him. The guy had a gun pointing it at him, no problem, right? He shot him in the head. I'm like, hey, man, you ain't got time to aim. If he got shot in the head, he got shot in the head. Sad day for him. He shouldn't have come into the store with a gun pointing it at the guy, right? And all those other employees that he has.
There were 2 other female employees that were behind the counter, and the 16-year-old was pointing the gun at all of them. Okay, so they were all scared. The girls ran in the back, and Jerome did what he did. He grabbed his gun and he shot him.
Right. Of course, the part where he loses me, he comes back into the store, and he grabs a second gun.
Yes.
And shoots him 5 times, 46 seconds later. Okay. Guilty.
Yeah, look, it took a long time for me to agree with that. At first I was like, no, you're not in the situation. You don't know what's happening, right? You don't see the 16-year-old in the surveillance after he gets shot the first time in the head. What if he was moving? What if he did serve a threat? I needed more evidence. So I went and I saw just raw footage of the surveillance. And you would think that if you felt like the 16-year-old was still a threat, you would move with a sense of urgency. You would think, damn, I need to grab my gun. Maybe he ran out of bullets in his first gun. I need to grab another gun. I need to make sure that, he's not a threat anymore. Except watch the surveillance. He just does not seem to have a sense of urgency. Here's the raw footage for you guys.
All right, now, again, this is after, you'll see the shooting, and then he'll come back into the store after the first set of shots.
So there he is chasing the accomplice out of the pharmacy.
Right there. And that kid ran away, so he comes back in. Okay, he's not running. Seems fairly calm.
He's looking for a shiny gun to maybe test it out. I mean, he just doesn't seem like he's really worried, like he feels threatened. If you're threatened, you don't move that slowly. And then you don't shoot someone 5 more times.
Yeah, and you're standing over him. If he was a threat, why did you stand over him? That doesn't seem like a thing you would do if you thought the guy was going to grab a gun and shoot you, right? No, he came back and executed him, man. There's no way around it. And I say definitely guilty, right? And look, you feel bad for him in the first place. He's protecting the people at his store. He had a gun pointed to him, et cetera, et cetera. But we cannot let people be their own, be the executioner, judge and executioner in that situation. You just can't. Otherwise, every time there's a robbery, the guy comes into your house, maybe he has a gun, maybe he doesn't have a gun, you disable him, and instead of calling the cops, you put 5 bullets in his head? No, you can't do that.
Yeah, and another thing is, you know, he has not been formally sentenced, okay? And the jury has recommended a life sentence for him. And I think that that's where I disagree with the jury, okay? And I don't know what the real sentence should be. You know, maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 25 years, but I think a life sentence for what happened, I don't think that makes sense. Because I don't see him as, I honestly don't see him as a threat to society. You want to put dangerous people in prison that go out looking to kill people, okay? He was at work. These 2 people walked in. Both of them were armed, okay? He shot the robber, and then afterwards he did something that was wrong, but I don't know if that warrants a life sentence.
Well, I mean, look, he executed the kid, right? So on the other hand, if that doesn't warrant a life sentence, what does, right? So, JR, thoughts?
I was completely with what you were saying. I was just not considering Anna's thought about whether or not he should get life for it, since it was kind of it started as an assault on him. So that's where I'm on the fence. I mean, he's definitely guilty. That's obvious. I don't know how anyone could say that aspect of it was self-defense. I mean, if the first shot, if he's laying there squirming on the floor and he dies on the way to the hospital, the shot came from the confrontation. So I don't know. I mean, because 20 years is probably that dude's life just about anyway. He looks like he's like 60-something years old anyway. I don't know.
Right. Well, you give him 20 years, he can get paroled and, God knows when, et cetera, et cetera. But, can you make a case that it should be less? Of course you can make a case that it should be less. And I felt for him in the beginning, But, Steve, you're former prosecutor.
Because it kind of it seemed like, because he chased the friend, it didn't seem like he got the friend. He didn't get anything, that kid got away, at least for now. I don't know if they caught him later. It seemed like he was frustrated he couldn't get the other guy. So he just kind of comes back and says, well, I got this one. It seemed very thought out. Not like it's premeditated, but it seemed thought out enough that it's out of frustration. He said, I got this guy. Let me go ahead and kill him because that'll help me. It's like he was quelling his anger.
Right.
And you can't do that. You can't.
You just can't. I think that's clear. Steve, the audio guy / prosecutor.
Well, actually, Ben made a really good point. He said, going back to whether he's guilty or not, imagine if a cop had done that. There's no way, right? We would go crazy if a cop shot a guy in the head and then 46 seconds later came back and shot him 5 more times, right?
Right.
So I don't know why there's confusion here. He's definitely guilty. With respect to the verdict itself, I mean, in terms of the sentence, I'm generally against life sentences just across the board. I think it's BS. It's fake tough guy. You're in jail for life. I don't believe it. I think we should give him some opportunity to rehabilitate, get better, and come out.
What kind of soft-ass prosecutor was
I'm a softie.
I like
That's
it.
why I had to leave.
Okay. So you're going with Anna's 20 years or whatever. All right, Casper, it looks like you've got a victory on your hands. The sentence is lowered to 20 years. All right. So, Ursula, you got that on your side.
All right. Let's take
just before we take the break, one last quick thing on that. Look, I think part of what sends me over the edge to saying I think life sentence is okay is that when you come back to kill the kid, it's malicious. You know what I'm saying? Like, for the millionth time, the first part is so understandable, right? But then that's kind of like an extra layer of like, ha ha. Like, now I'm going to murder you and see how you like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was on that side, yes.
Yeah, I agree. But he was malicious in the span of 46 seconds. If it was like in a couple of hours, I'm totally with you.
Right.
But 46 seconds, he's still pumped up. So
Yeah.
I give him a break.
I hear you. All right, you know what? Once again, you guys win. Just calm down. 20 years, okay? Now it's settled. All right, let's come back.